Hello, friends. Welcome back to a 1D10T Does Stuff, and I am the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. Thank you for being here, Lockpick. Great to see you. And we are, of course, here to have a serious discussion about systemic inequalities in the medical infrastructures in the United States. Specifically, we are working on what I believe to be a danger to black women, specifically in the mental and behavioral health structures of the United States. However, we are also getting a lot of background perspective on what all of that means. Which means that we've had to start with understanding how the medical structures of the United States are systemically racist. And the book we're working on today, Inflamed, Deep Medicine in the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa, Marya, and Patel, it's not restricted to the United States, and it's not restricted to specifically black women. This is a more generalized account of sexism and racism in these structures, in the medical structures around the world, really, though. What Inflamed is attempting to do is to use the analogy of the human body and its internal workings, i.e., the biome, the analogy of the biome to the environment around it, the exposome. And not only by using this analogy with a specific eye to inflammation, but also pointing out that there is an inexorable link between the biome and the exposome. What happens to one affects the other, and what happens to the other affects the one. Although I guess it's more what the one does affects the other, and what affects the other affects the one. So we've been going through, in this book, we've been going through sort of different bodily systems and discussing their analogy in nature around us. Discussing an analogy for them in nature around us. But also linking the two together. I found this book difficult at the start because it was challenging me to look at the text in a new way. Engage with the text in a new way. It was much less dry than I was expecting. It was much less, a statement, a list, an explanation kind of thing that you would find normally in a textbook. Which has made it actually quite enjoyable to read. aside from the fact that it is talking about not enjoyable subject matter. I find I like the way that this book is written. Now, that being said, there have been a couple of moments where I've thought, oh, that's a little uncomfortable. And some of that has to do with our ever evolving social norms and ethical structures. And as I see it, for the most part, our ethical structures, at least the ones that I'm observing in my bubble, I like them. And the shifts towards the more rigorous ethics and application of ethics, I think, is a good thing. I like that, especially because it's the ethics that I agree with. Progressive ethics. The trend has been towards more progressive ethics, and I like that. Now, that is only in my own bubble. I will say that, outside of my bubble, it appears that the world has been trending in the other direction. Is continuing to. However, we're coming up on election season in Virginia. In fact, there's a special election in one part of Virginia today. Ain't that a thing? Not only is every year election year in Virginia, occasionally you'll get two. It is exhausting to keep up with politics in this state. Let me tell you. We will see this upcoming election, not the one today, but the one this year, the one coming up in November. I believe it's Virginia and New Jersey have these off-year elections. Virginia and somewhere else have these off-year elections, and they are looked at as a political bellwether as to what's going to happen in the midterms. Now, that I don't think that holds true anymore. Or at least it's not a direct correlation. You could find that I believe it's an inverse correlation these days, where what happens in the Virginia and New Jersey election will mollify one base, whereas it will energize the opposition base. It will calm its own base down. Whoever seems to pull ahead in these elections, their base gets lazy, and then the other side is like, oh, we need to step up our game, and it gets them energized for the upcoming midterm. And I think midterms might have a similar effect on the presidential elections. If Democrats do well in the midterms, I think it's going to energize the MAGA base. I think the only thing that could sort of make the playing field even is if in the off-year elections and the midterms, you end up with a very dead even split. Like, if we end up with an evenly split House and Senate by the end of the midterms, that's gonna turn up the intensity of the presidential election. And it's gonna turn up the intensity of the off-year election as well. And again, I think the off-year election may, depending on what happens in this year's election and the midterms, the off-year election may set the tone for the presidential election or may offset the tone for the presidential election. And this is sort of, and in general, this year this cycle, I daren't prognosticate for the crystal ball is too muddied. What I will go on record and prognosticate as saying is that buying U.S. Treasury bonds, at least right now, and in the near future, probably a good idea. Because the concept that's not going to come out of this as a loser in any of this, the concept that's going to come out a winner is always going to be capitalism. I don't think we are ready to live in a post-capitalist society. I don't think we are nearly at all ready to live in a post-capitalist society, even though it is destroying us. I think we are almost ready to move away from free market capitalism, but I don't think we're ready to move away from capitalism. I think that colonialism is still way too entrenched in our blood, so to speak, to get away from capitalism. I think that, to bring it around to what we're discussing here today, a lot of what Inflamed is talking about is how colonized bodies are affected by colonization, how colonized land is affected by colonization, and how the two have an effect on each other. So, with all of that being said, let me do today's ad read real quick. Oi, that's an awkward way to get it in there. But today's pre-rolls brought to you by The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, 105 West Main Street. On the downtown mall, above the bricks, Suite 200, a great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds. A bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. Also, they do have the lowest prices in town, according to my own highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my biased research. And by biased research, I mean I didn't ask any other prices. I think I'm going to leave that bit out. Don't forget to check the website for times and events. The website is thehiddenleafcville.com. That's thehiddenleafcville.com. All one word. Where you can find times for events such as Frosty Fridays, their Friday sales event, where you can find our other two sponsors. Firehouse, where there's smoke, there's Firehouse. and Kush Gang, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables. And, of course, with the usual disclaimer that today is a politically and socially charged episode, and we will be talking about difficult topics. All of our sponsors, including Firehouse, Kush Gang, and Hidden Leaf, are businesses. So they don't really have socio-political opinions like that. All of the opinions you hear expressed herein belong to the expressor of the opinion, the channel, and or the label, but not necessarily any of our sponsors. And as that one guy I knew as Head used to say, the proof is in the puffin. That seems like a cruel place to put the proof. Poor little puffin. What did that puffin ever do to deserve major surgery like that? Well, all right, friends. We have some difficult stuff to talk about here. So, pull up a comfy chair, get you a nice dank cup of coffee, and sip on some bold weed so that you can be ready for this difficult discussion. That almost worked. That was almost what I was going for. All right, let's see here. So we are in the chapter The Endocrine System. That's a little bright. Let's see if we can do something to make that maybe a little easier to read there. We are in the chapter called The Endocrine System, and we have just finished the section The Tragedy of the Built Environment, I believe. I believe that's the section we just finished. Yes. The Tragedy of the Built Environment. We're going to back up a paragraph and get a running start, as we always do. It helps give a better understanding of what I'm about to be looking at. We're going to back up 2 paragraphs. A string of epidemiological studies has connected early life exposure to stress or trauma with addictive behavior through the activation of the HPA axis, the endocrine superhighway that is intimately connected to the nervous system. Unsurprisingly, inflammation plays a role. Drugs such as opiates and alcohol induce the expression of a transcription factor that turns on the genes that make inflammatory cytokines in the brain and non-inflammatory targets such as opioid receptors. This transcription factor plays a central role in the inflammatory response and also mediates complex behaviors involved in drug reward learning, stress responses, and depression. These systems are interconnected on the molecular level and provide a possible framework to understanding how opiate addiction modulates the stress response, leading to more inflammation. So I think what it's saying is that that's how you end up getting the DTs when you stop taking opiates, is because those receptors. Never mind. I don't understand what I thought. I don't get it. I mean, I kind of do. I kind of understand what they're saying, but I can't translate that to. Nah, not quite. As these drugs and the story of fever itself reveal, symptoms that were once considered separate are, in fact, tightly bound together. As we saw above, IL-1 was understood as a hormone known as endogenous pyrogen before it was relabeled a cytokine, a feature of the immune system. All these chemical signals keep the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system tightly interwoven and in constant communication as they respond to our environment, interact with organisms inside and around us, and optimize our readiness for the challenges ahead. The opposite of stress. Something as seemingly trivial as having a plant in a hospital room reduces pain, anxiety, fatigue, and blood pressure in patients compared to those in rooms without them. It's not surprising. One study found that the remission from depression was significantly higher I think I'm going to want to highlight this. Among those who walked in nature, 61%, then among those who were treated in a hospital, 21%, or left untreated, 5%. I might go walk in nature this afternoon after stream. Sprawling literature on forest bathing points to an urban route for deep medicine. The web of life is already in cities, even if it's attenuated compared to rural areas. Central to the story of how human well-being is regulated in nature is the chemical language of hormones. Even though we're at the early stages of understanding the human web of life boundary, we are a little further along in understanding how human bodies create hormones that react to being in harmony with their surroundings and in relationships. One such hormone is oxytocin, made by the hypothalamus, which plays a role in reproduction of all vertebrates. It is also made by the uterus, the testes, and the heart. Oh, that's interesting. This important hormone is responsible for smooth muscle contractions of the uterus that push a baby out into the world, for the contractions of lactiferous ducts that bring milk to an infant's mouth. It also plays a central role in spontaneous erections and ejaculation. Oxytocin is essential to social cooperation and empathy, and to modulating the impact of stress. Called the love hormone because of the feeling of connection it engenders. Oxytocin enhances an organism's responsiveness to socially relevant stimuli. It boosts the action of endogenous feel-good molecules like anandamide, that help cannabis promote a sense of well-being and social reward. Huh. It is also involved in the complex behavior of bonding, which makes you want to cuddle your partner or kiss your children even after they've drawn on the walls with permanent markers. Oxytocin levels rise when one feels strong social support and one gives or receives a massage. Its presence drives down the amount of circulating cortisol even in the face of psychological stress, creating a calming effect. It also has an anti-inflammatory effect through direct modulation of the immune system. Oh, okay. Although one study showed that oxytocin may be involved in developing in-group bias, Jewish Israelis who were given a dose expressed more empathy towards the pain of Palestinians. I'm not touching on that one right now. When taken intranasally, sprayed up your nose. Huh. Had to work on that one for a second. Wasn't sure what I was seeing there. It's a lot of A's, N's, and L's. When taken intranasally, oxytocin makes people more generous, more trusting, and even better at anticipating and understanding others' emotional states. It enhances social cooperation, but only when participants are not overwhelmed by greed or self-interest. It also acts differently depending on an individual's cognitive approach, whether intuitive or more reflective. Interesting. Listening to music increases our oxytocin levels, and when the music gives us chills, dopamine is released in the deep reward centers of the brain. Singing together in groups also stimulates oxytocin release, and improvised singing promotes higher levels. In birds, singing plays a crucial role in bonding and mating, often for life in pairs. And these behaviors are also mediated through this hormone. Research is ongoing into how language acquisition in humans might be tied to the action of this incredible molecule. That bit about the birds, I find it to be very suppositional to be stated in a such a like take it for fact kind of way. Oxytocin acts on different centers in our brain to release dopamine. It also prevents serotonin from being taken up, which leads to an overall sense of well-being. But lest we fall into the trap of advocating cuddle chemistry, Cuddle chemistry. I like it. It's important to note a few things. The studies that tout the positive effects of oxytocin are far from definitive, and good science avoids sweeping generalities. Deficits of oxytocin are, we suggest, symptoms of not an underdeveloped pharmaceutical approach or of a personal failure to find happiness, an endorphin deficiency for which something might be prescribed, but a world that has severed human connections to the web of life. The exposome is, by definition, not something for which there can be a pill. No chemical can erase the cumulative burden of exposures from before birth or remove social, ecological, or economic injustice. The solution to stress isn't an oxytocin pill, just as the solution to a denuded microbiome isn't a poop transplant. They had to bring that back up. If oxytocin is like happiness, then the answer isn't a brave new world with happiness dispensed for all for the profit of a multinational corporation. It's reimagining and reconfiguring how we live so as to fill our lives with the opportunities to naturally enjoy oxytocin by connecting with other humans and the rest of the web of life. A political anatomy. Wow. Take a quick look, see how. Oh, it's going to be a quick one today. All right. Well, after we read, we may talk about some other stuff. A political anatomy. Cartesianism makes for bad physiology and bad politics. Descartes knew that if he posited two separate realms of mind and body, he'd need a bridge between the two. As we'll argue more fully in Chapter 8, this philosophical problem disappears. We appreciate that the mind and body aren't hermetically sealed, as Cartesian logic and so much of colonial medicine suggests. There's no need for a pineal gland to act as a portal between the world and self. As science is increasingly making clear, consciousness is fully embodied and the body is fully conscious. The self only exists embedded in the world. I like that. I like that. It fits with my take on consciousness that it is an emergent quality, um, not something you can pin down to biology or chemistry, or but it is emergent from the actions of a body existing in a world. I have a friend who I think would like that. Oops, that wasn't what I meant to do. All right. I'll text that to them later. Wow. Let's try that again, huh? Descartes' anatomical error was one that came with its own license for supremacy. If only thinking things could suffer, and Descartes and his ilk recognized that another as thinking things, then. Huh. Let's try that again, too. Oh, then. Okay, that didn't end there. If only thinking things could suffer, and Descartes and his ilk recognized one another as thinking things, then they were able to reserve for themselves the power to adjudicate what kinds of life might suffer authentically. As we've seen, the pain of women and BIPOC people is disbelieved, or when acknowledged, matters less. And in the same token, the suffering of the rest of the web of life has been ignored. That animals might suffer remains controversial. Often, in terms of dealing with that suffering, is to cast it as a rights issue, expanding the original language and law of colonialism to entities to which it was never intended to stretch. More recently, indigenous groups and ecological movements have pushed to accord rights to nature. This is something with which we're sympathetic, but that misses the deeper medicine. The language of rights depends a lot on the state to recognize the right to have rights. In this view, rights are kind of private property guaranteed by a legal contract. We need a new language, one that doesn't require sanction by the state. A language that might dramatically change the relationship between humans and the world around us. Do a different one there. That is, I think, an important distinction to make about how how having rights is a right. And you know, in this sense, I'd like to point out that because of the way our language works, all rights are a privilege. All our rights are granted to us by a state, by somebody stronger than us, somebody who controls our life, our existence. So it's not really a right. It's a privilege. It's just that it's a privilege that's been recognized in a social contract. And to that effect, I kind of want to point out that, you know, what's going on in the United States right now really is emblematic of the fact that our rights are not rights. They are privileges granted by the state and currently being taken away by the greater state, by the federal government, by specifically the executive branch of the federal government. And while our expressed, written, social contract that we see as, that we've been told to see as legally binding, that social contract is only binding if the more powerful party agrees that it is still legally binding. In my younger days, as an edgelord, as if I'm not still one of the things I would outrageously say just to get a rise out of people was that the only true rights we have are the rights we can defend with our own two hands. Which is really very, rugged individualist of me. But the deeper meaning there, the deeper point is that any social contract that we enter into in order to guarantee rights only works as long as the organization developed around that social contract continues to act in good faith. And from my perspective, that organization is currently no longer acting in good faith. Take that to mean what you will, but what I really mean is our current government is screwing us over. Specifically, the executive branch of our current government is screwing us over. And the legislative branch is letting him. And so is the judicial branch. They are handing the executive branch power, and they are shining his knobs. And it is gross and disturbing and worrisome. Especially because it is obvious to anyone paying any attention that the current executive branch is solely out for its own profit and cares nothing for any people, any of its constituency. Remember, a vote for Trevor Stewart 1308 in 2028 is a vote for the dictator you deserve. As I let that sit uncomfortably in the air there for a moment. It is possible to imagine urban spaces filled with biodiversity, but without addressing the rhythms of colonial capitalism that literally stop us from taking a minute to smell the flowers, we're unlikely to be able to engage with the web of life as we need to. Cities are built to run all day and all night, with workers on shift around the clock in a social architecture that pollutes with light, noise, and loneliness. Human rhythms are severed from those with which humans evolved. Granting rights to animals or to nature can't address this deeper deficit in the cosmology of capitalist colonialism. This This view of cities, I find, is I find it simplistic and a little dated. You know, especially in the last couple of years, but you know, really in the last 5 or 10 years, we have really started to move away from 24-hour cities. We have really started to move as the population density is thinned out, as uh, as birth rates have gone down, we are trending back towards, from what I can see, we are trending back towards uh, a daytime society, which is not good for me. That does not work well for me. I am this being a day person and getting up early in the morning and doing these. This is not. This is not what my body wants to do. Oh, buddy. Hey. It's okay. Deadpan over here having a nightmare. It's okay, buddy. Hey. Who's a good dog? Who's a good dog? There you go. All right. I don't. I am a more nocturnally oriented person, and I find that this idea of cities would work great for me, but it doesn't. It's not like that. Um, Engaging in deep medicine means understanding how every human's internal state synchronizes with the environment around them and helping that dialogue speak in as many languages as possible. The extermination of these languages was a central part of the colonial project. In North America, the locus of that extinction was the boarding school, to which generations of indigenous people were kidnapped to be civilized by the state, as we observed in Chapter 5. The indigenous ethnobotanist Linda Black Elk says, for indigenous people in North America, health has four components: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. The genocide of indigenous people has created lasting intergenerational trauma. A large part of this soul wound was created through cutting the ties that bind through language. Some indigenous groups are working to heal the connections that were violently severed through these schools and policies of cultural erasure. Maintaining and revitalizing one's native language has positive health effects, specifically in those diseases where inflammation plays a role. Oxytocin is involved in the social process of language learning, knitting together the reciprocal relations of hearing and repeating and understanding semantic relations as taught by experienced speakers. Language is good for the soul. That's what that just said. Hi, Just Me Crystal. Much love. Glad to see you here. Happy Taco Tuesday. More surprising, like an exposure to nature in youth, exposure to a non colonialized linguistic cosmology may have medical benefits. For First Nations people in Alberta who maintain their language, oh, not for. First Nations people in Alberta who maintain their language seem to be shielded against diabetes. Even after controlling for socioeconomic factors, the higher the language knowledge among Indigenous groups, the lower their level of diabetes. A strong knowledge of language may reflect better organized community resistance to the damaging effects of colonialism and its toxic pathways of disease. Language can play a protective role in youth suicide, which is a sign that cultural distress that affects Indigenous people around the world. One study found that groups of Indigenous people where more than 50% of the tribe spoke their language had youth suicide rates 6 times lower than those where less than 50% spoke their language. The cultural continuity of language helps Indigenous people be who we are and fend off a sickness of colonialization we fight every day. I think the takeaway there, not just the takeaway, but I think something we want to stop and look at here, that I want to stop and look at here, is how language affects, how strongly language affects your lived experience. It's, I think, I think that without proper language, it's very hard to access one's own experience. If you don't have the language for the experience, I think it's very hard to understand the experience. I think when you start to develop language around an experience, you start to be able to process it, understand it, and deal with it. And I also think that there are ways that language can be and probably is used to to express not just the inherent nature of an item, like food in this case, say, but also not just, I don't mean inherent nature. That's not what I'm looking for there. Not just to express the static nature of an item, such as food, but also its intrinsic qualities, such as if it is good food or bad food, healthy or not, food that will give you diabetes or food that won't. You know, I feel like if we had a nomenclature, if we had a not a nomenclature, little thing that goes on the front of a word that meant that we associated with meaning diabetes making or diabetes giving food, like well, I think we would probably avoid a lot of the foods that had that nomenclature. You know, it would be if there was a trigger in the language to associate with the negative qualities, then at the very least, there is a better chance of making an informed decision. Yeah. Tipazoan Tolman, who teaches the Lakota language to young children, has some ideas on why language plays a protective role in health. Her parents were both forced away from their Lakota-speaking families into boarding schools where their language was stolen. Her grandfather tried to make the best of the situation he could not fight. Tried to make the best of a situation he could not fight, telling his daughter that it was important for her to learn how to speak English, what he called the money language. But Tolman knew that there are things more powerful than money. Speaking our own language, it's our superpower, she said. If hormones are chemical connections braiding together the systems of our body to respond to the world around us, then language is the way human relationships are woven in the world. Tolman puts it like this. Tolman put it like this. Without our language, we forget these integral ancient connections to our spiritual ancestors. We come from the sun, our ancient grandmothers and grandfathers. And without our language to really reinforce this, we have been violently severed from those relationships. When we're not embraced with this love that they have for us. They still love us. They are still here. I always think about them like forgotten grandmothers and grandfathers who are over in a nursing home. We don't see them or acknowledge them. We don't visit with them. We don't say their names. We don't remember their names in the manner in which we used to. The moon, the sun, the earth, yes, all of those ancient grandmothers. Unchki means grandmother, like water. Unchki, Unchk. That is the name of the water and everything that comes from the water. I totally mangled however that's supposed to be pronounced. Our people used to practice these songs for her. these acknowledgments, and we don't anymore. Most of our people don't even remember her name. Oh, that was my elbow popping. In 2016, a prayer camp formed at Standing Rock where thousands of Lakota people with their comrades, indigenous people from all over the world as well as settlers, came together to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from crossing the Minnesos or Missouri River. In early August, as the heavy construction machines were digging the trench for the pipeline, two of Tolman's sisters jumped the fence and stood in front of the machines in order to stop them. They succeeded. Construction stopped for several months until they hired private armies arrived. The day after the sisters stopped the machines, they went down to the river, Tolman recounts. One of my sisters, she said, there was a grandmother with us when we got to the river. We could hear crying, and the crying was like grief, like how a mom sounds when her child dies. They stopped and looked at each other to see who it was, and they realized it was coming from the water. We took this spiritual happening to our spiritual leaders, and what was told to us in ceremony was that our grandmother, the water... I'm not going to say that because I'm going to get it wrong again. And she was crying out of grief and anger and sadness all mixed together at the state of our people. She said, everyone wants to defend the water right now, but nobody even remembers my name, and no one even remembers my songs, and nobody acknowledges me anymore. And that was real for us. And so we started implementing simple protocol with the water. We'll pray, we'll say her name, we'll bring her name back to our mouths. Again, I'm not gonna do that justice. Tolman has taught Lakota language in an immersion program for young children on the Standing Rock Reservation for over 5 years. She returns these words back to the mouths of the next generation, and in doing so, she awakens ancient relationships so the children are able to name themselves in relation to the world around them and the world that came before. She has noticed that families where the children are speaking their language seem to be doing better than families where no Lakota is spoken. The language connects people with their past. Watching her own children speak Lakota, Tolman is joined to the future. At a Sundance ceremony a few years back, her 5-year-old son was receiving a blessing as he walked towards the sacred tree and touched it and turned around to his mother and said in his language, nah, I am not gonna mangle that. You know, one John, one Jana, Mawatstaya. Mom, now I am okay. In the Cheyenne language, the word for home is enovo, which means you are home, not your home. You are home, which could mean falling asleep on the couch at your grandmother's, or sitting at a table of your auntie while she cooks, or returning the land to your family takes care of, or speaking your community's language. You are home defines a system of relationships between humans and between well-being between humans and their built environment and the web of life. A sense of well-being comes with a shared language, shared purpose, and common cause. A political community that stretches beyond the concept of nation with its vocabulary of rights. It is a consciousness of balance and happiness that is reflected in the very chemistry of our bodies. I do think I do think that where they're coming from around language, I, I feel like language doesn't just connect us to our past and to our ancestors. If done correctly, like if the language is correct, it can not only connect you to the past, to your ancestors from where you came from, but it can also connect you to the world around it and your place in that world, uh, and to the future, and I feel like they're getting at that, but that they also just sort of missed that, or they 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 said it they said it without making a connection between the things. But uh, but I agree about how important language is, and that it, how it's good at connecting us. They're being careful. They're being very careful. And I find that I find that interesting, because this was written. When was this written? '21, 2021. Well, it was written post. It was written pre January 6th. Oh, that's okay. You were out there doing praxis. Uh, this was written. I could see why they'd want to be careful. They were still trying to be sort of careful. Um, I there may be also a reason why they're doing it for reasons for later. It may be part of something, some sort of tying all the strings together later. Um, you know, or that just may not have been that important to the message they were trying to make. Um, I do think that it is. I think that the statistics there are very interesting, about how. Hey, JB, what's up? Great to see you. Got here just at the end. We're pretty much wrapping up. It was a short episode today. Uh, Almost forgot to do that. But yeah, I do. Uh, the the statistics around how language, uh, how indigenous groups speaking their own language changes their health outcomes reduces diabetes, reduces suicide. I think uh, I find that very, very interesting. Um, Also, I find the actions of oxytocin very interesting as well. And that one line about how oxytocin binds the different systems within the body together, how that kind of mirrors how language ties different individuals in the exposome together. That was an interesting comparison. I felt like I appreciated that. Many of their languages involve concepts that we don't even have words for. Exactly. And I think English is really a very basic language. We barely cover. Our language barely covers what we experience. It's a different kind of self-awareness to speak and understand them. Yeah, I bet it really is. I bet it really is. Uh, you know, our language, English is the words English has for for one's place in the universe is very very limited. You know, down to that it's our place in the universe, not our relationship to the universe. The word that I'm thinking of is niche, our niche, our. But that language very much lends itself to being separate from the rest of the universe, but in a encapsulated space in the universe, and it doesn't speak to the relationship between the individual and the rest of the universe. And I think a lot of English language misses uh misses relationship language that addresses relationships, addresses one's relationship to the world. I think yeah, it just, and I feel like the colonialist nature of the United States and of English language itself, the colonialist nature of English is is almost on purpose. That separation is on purpose so that domination can be forgiven. Domination is allowable. English isn't a language, it's three broken parts of three different languages trying to be one language. That's fair. And I think referring to it as the money language, uh, as they did, uh, uh, was good. Like It lets you know what English is about. The only reason English does what it does is to prop up capitalism, to prop up white supremacy, Eurocentric supremacy, white supremacy. Let's not fall into the trap of not using the proper language when we have the proper language. Language. Yeah. So it is. Uh, Dang it! Now I'm thinking about synonyms for language. I think broadening our perspectives by experiencing languages that are completely foreign to us and force us to think in a new way, force us to think about relationships in a new way. I think I can. I think that would be really important. Um, I'm, I'm saying this. I don't. I'm barely monolingual. You know, I barely speak English good. I know just enough Spanish to. I know almost enough Spanish to work in a sandwich shop. Um, I feel like I feel like I don't. My lack of language doesn't seem to inhibit me too much because I'm not intellectually, you know, I'm not into. I'm not an intellectual giant. So ultimately, I'm not thinking these big thoughts that require a different language. Even though I'm sure my perspective needs opening up, it always does. Um, Honestly, I don't think it'll make me any more uh, capable of tackling the big thoughts. Um, it's I'm I, I feel like in a lot of ways I've found the edges of my intellectual capacity and my intellectual capabilities. Uh, and while I want to be smart, accepting myself for who I am is going to lead to a much happier life. It would introduce thoughts I never knew I could have, though. Yeah, and that would be nice. Um, I'm I am exceptionally bad at learning languages. Like and I'll learn a new language. I'll try to learn Lakota. take comfort in knowing you are smarter than 41% of people in the USA. My igpe athlete access. It would, I should learn a new language that will open me up to new perspectives. I'm not promising I will do this, but I will start looking into it. Because you're right, Lockpick. It'll help me have thoughts I'd never had before. It will help me. It will open me up to new things, and maybe it will help me be smarter, be actually critically smarter, like more real brain thought capable. As with guitar, I don't hold out much hope. I've put a lot of practice in for a long time and gotten to mediocre, if that. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. I think part of why I see myself as not smart is because I see the limitations. Like, I've put myself up to the point where my intellect has failed. Where I just can't do the thinking thing. Like, I just can't think like that. I can't. And as such, I think by knowing my boundaries and knowing my limitations, it makes that area enclosed seem so much smaller. And what I'm, when I say I'm not smart, I'm not comparing myself to other people per se. I mean, I'm comparing myself to people smarter than me, but I'm not comparing myself to... I'm not really comparing myself to people. I'm not really comparing myself... I'm comparing... No discussions about quantum theory. Oh, boy, I have got some quantum theory on lock, buddy. But what I've got on lock is a lot of information. A lot of what's learned by other people. Not very much about being able to put my own ideas together to synthesize a new idea. Except, I do think that... Okay, I think 0-point energy... I think quantum fluctuation isn't fluctuation. It is a topographical map of the changing vacuum state from one across. It's a 3-dimensional perception or a 4-dimensional perception of a 5-dimensional landscape. We see 0-point fluctuations, those little vacuum fluctuations that happen at the Planck length that cause everything. In much the same way that at the largest scale, gravity is not a force, it is a topography of space-time. Also, at the smallest scale, it's not a force, it's not energy, it's topography. All of that being said, I think I heard somebody else say it first. I don't think that is a new theory for me. String theory, I love string theory, but I also know that string theory is as of yet incapable of generating a testable hypothesis, thusly negating any possibility for it to really be taken seriously in a scientific way. Although my version of string theory is that there are tiny creatures, tiny little aspects of Ahmet, the Eater of Souls, down there at the very smallest, and what they're doing is they're the ones plucking the strings at different frequencies that make stuff happen. I believe that these aspects of Ahmet come in every shape and size, or every size, and what they do is they are the actual carriers of every action in the universe. I.e., they're I was going to say electromagnetism, but that's not the only carrier of action. It's one of the main ones, but it's not the only one. String theory is... I love it. As a religion, I love it. It doesn't give enough testable scientific, enough testable ideas. It doesn't give any testable ideas, which means it's not, I can't accept it scientifically. See, again, this is, that is, again, someone else's work. Someone else said that, and I believe them, so I repeat it. I don't have the intellect to go through all of string theory and really work out if I can generate a testable hypothesis from it. What I think disqualifies me from being smart is that I don't exactly have original thoughts. I don't have original thoughts. And I can't synthesize a new thought from two existing ones. It's very hard for me to take two pieces of information and put them together and come out with a different thing, a different thought. It's just not... But learning a new language isn't that kind of thinking. It's not that kind of thought. It is... What that's doing is opening your mind up to these new thought experiences that somebody else has already had and is encouraging you to have. I do it all the time with jokes. I mean, kind of, I guess. I apply a mathematical formula, though. Like, that's the thing, is like, I don't actually do it. I apply a mathematical formula. I see something, go, ha, I bet there's something in that. Then I apply a math formula and something pops out. It's not the same as going through and actually having the thought. And I mean, especially because it's, although I guess I do it with a few jokes. There are a few jokes that I do it with, but all right. All right. I accept that. I accept that, Brock. I do it with jokes. I do it with comedy. Um my humor is a manifestation of just saying whatever pops into my crazy head. And somehow it works. A lot of my humor is very refined from inputs. Yeah, a lot of my humor is very refined from a lot of my sense of humor also is very much refined by the people that I've been around and the interactions and relationships, you know. Well, that's been some crazy food for thought, eh? I think we are coming up on the wrap up point. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Brock. Thank you, Lockpit. I have been having problems speaking all day. Thank you, Brock. Thank you, Lockpick. Thank you, JB1200. Thank you, Just Me Crystal. Much love to all of you. Thank you for being here. And thank you, any lurkers who are here. Stick around for the raid. Thank you, JB. You have a great day too. Much love to you, Crystal. And now is the time when I say, there's what I'm looking for. Now's the time on the stream when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.